Hello? Okay, just a second. It's for you.
What did kids growing up in the 1970s have? Not the latest iPhone, not TikTok, and definitely no YouTube Shorts. The thing that kept kids sitting still back then was TV, and one of the strangest, smartest, funniest shows from America's golden age. That was The Muppet Show. It was not just a puppet show, it was music comedy, a list guests and characters strong enough to make a whole family laugh together in one evening. But maybe because it is tied so closely to childhood and laughter, you and I both want to believe the people behind it must have lived gentle lives. The truth is they did not. One man gone too suddenly at his peak. One man whose future was taken by AIDS. And one who once held the soul of the Muppets only to be pushed aside by Disney. Let's look back at the people who shaped our parents' childhood, and for many of us, our own. And stay until the end because I have 5 facts I see as treasures for anyone who grew up with the Muppet Show. Number 1, Jim Henson as Kermit the Frog, /Waldorf /Rolf the Dog.
Wait, Kermit, you're angry with me.
Yes, I'm angry.
But why?
Because you were supposed to stop at the 7th floor.
Jim Henson did not just create Kermit. He created a piece of childhood that millions of Americans thought would always be there. Born in 1936, Henson stepped into 1976 at 40, when The Muppet Show premiered and turned him into one of the most important creative minds in American television. But before that breakout was a long road. He had been nurturing Kermit since the days of Sam and Friends, carrying the character through years of experimentation before mainstream audiences finally embraced it. The irony is that American networks at first did not believe a Muppet Show could attract adult viewers. 2 pilots for ABC in 1974 and 1975 did not lead to a series. Only when Henson partnered with Lou Grade and took the project to the UK did The Muppet Show truly come to life.
When you're working in television, you're never dealing with perfection. You're always you're trying very hard to get the best thing you can as fast as you can and keep moving along.
After that, things moved fast. Henson was no longer just the man behind Kermit. He went further with the Muppet movie, The Great Muppet Caper, then expanded into The Dark Crystal and Labyrinth. In 1987, he was inducted into the Television Academy Hall of Fame. That is the standing of a man who did not just create a hit, but built an entire world. But his personal life was not as gentle as his public image. Jim married Jane Henson in 1959, had 5 children, then separated in 1986. According to biographer Brian J. Jones' work, consumed almost all of his life, and his lack of fidelity wore the marriage down even more. Near the end, he was also worn out by the pressure of the Disney deal, something Frank Oz later said may have exhausted him.
Hi out there. Yes.
Now, first
I
of all,
haven't been barked at by an audience before.
Honestly, Jim Henson's death is one of the saddest celebrity losses. What makes it hurt so much is the feeling that it might not have had to happen. At first, he just felt unwell and did not want to worry anyone. He delayed seeing a doctor thinking it would pass, but by the time he was admitted to a hospital in New York, it had gone too far. The infection had spread aggressively, and Jim Henson died on May 16, 1990. He was 53 still at the height of his creative power. And years later, what people mourn most is not just a genius gone too soon, but the fact that millions of kids quietly lost one of the people who made the warmest part of their childhood. Number 2, Frank Oz as Miss Piggy /Fozzie Bear /Animal /Sam Eagle.
Oh, look, an omelet station! Oh, where? There's only one Miss Piggy, and she is...
Frank Oz was not just part of the Muppet Show. He held almost half of its life in his hands. Born in 1944 in Hereford, England, Frank stepped into 1976 at 32 when the show premiered, and audiences started to realize something amazing. Miss Piggy, Fozzie Bear, Animal, and Sam Eagle were all brought to life by the same man. Frank came to Jim Henson very early. He met Henson as a teenager doing puppetry in California, then at 19, moved to New York to work with him. This was not a side role. Frank Oz was a core collaborator from the beginning, and even D23 later emphasized that he was inseparable from the golden era of the Muppets.
Wouldn't
put the puppets on our hands when we rehearse because they're very heavy, and so we did it with it.
What made Frank Oz stand out was not just how many roles he played, but how hard each one was. Miss Piggy had to be glamorous and dangerous. Fozzie had to be naive but charming. Animal was like a storm trapped in a tiny body. Sam Eagle was so serious it became funny. Carrying that many conflicting personalities is not normal. After The Muppet Show, Frank proved he was more than a performer behind the curtain. He co-directed The Dark Crystal with Jim Henson, then built a directing career with The Muppets, Take Manhattan, Little Shop of Horrors, Dirty Rotten Scoundrels, What About Bob, and many more. In 2024, he was named a Disney legend. Frank Oz does not have the kind of heartbreaking personal tragedy like Jim Henson. His edge comes from personality. He is not the type to pretend everything is fine just to keep peace. In 2021, Frank openly said he wanted to return to the Muppets, but Disney did not want him, that they did not need him because he won't follow orders. That is the bitter part of Frank Oz. This year he is 82. He is still honored, still respected, but for longtime fans, this is what lingers. Sometimes, the person who understands a world the most is the one left standing outside it. Number 3, Richard Hunt as Scooter/Beaker/Janice/Statler/Sweetums. Richard Hunt is the kind of name that hurts more the more you learn about him. He was born in 1951 in the Bronx. When The Muppet Show premiered in 1976, he was only 25. But even then, he was not new. He had joined Jim Henson's company at 18 and quickly became one of the 5 core performers of the Muppets world. On The Muppet Show, he carried an impressive range: the sharp Scooter, the panicked Beaker, the dreamy Janice, the grumpy old Statler, and the giant Sweetums. That alone shows he was not just filling space. He was one of the people driving real energy into the show. Rutgers described him as a performer with rare mischief intelligence and generosity, while the Los Angeles Times showed his presence across the Henson empire from Sesame Street to Fraggle Rock and the biggest Muppet films of that era. But Richard Hunt's life took a brutally unfair turn. He was openly gay, living fully and vibrantly just as America entered the darkest years of the AIDS crisis. Then the disease started taking people around him one by one. The hardest loss was Nelson Bird, the man Richard called the most important person in his life, who died of AIDS in 1985 at just 31. Not long after Richard himself learned he was HIV positive. Those around him still remember someone warm, energetic, still trying to give life to others in the middle of so much loss. That is the part that hits hardest. A person so full of life, forced to live through such a cruel time. Richard Hunt died on January 7, 1992, from AIDS-related complications at 40. He did not fade away after his time. He died young, still full of life, after watching too many people he loved get taken by the same nightmare. The Muppet Christmas Carol was later dedicated to him, and in 2024, the book Funny Boy finally brought his story back to where it belongs. Number 4, Jerry Nelson as Floyd Pepper / Robin the Frog / New Zealand / Uncle Deadly. Jerry Nelson was not the loudest name from The Muppet Show, but he was one of the most deserving of respect. Born in 1934, Jerry stepped into 1976 at 42, older than Frank Oz or Richard Hunt. On The Muppet Show, he stood behind Floyd Pepper, Robin the Frog, New Zealand Crazy Harry Pops, and Uncle Deadly. He did not push characters through explosive energy. He made them live through voice music and a rare warmth. Jerry joined Jim Henson's group in 1965 and came to Sesame Street in the early 1970s. But even in the early days of The Muppet Show, he could not fully participate as much as he wanted. Not because of work, but because his daughter Christine had cystic fibrosis. Jerry chose to stay with her during summers, a crucial time for a child with that condition. That detail alone carries weight. And the pain deepened when Christine passed away in 1982. In his later years, Jerry Nelson faced another difficult stretch. He battled cancer, COPD, and emphysema, often needing an oxygen tank to breathe. By 2004, he no longer had the strength to perform physically, but he kept doing voice work. That kind of dedication is rare. The body was failing, but he kept giving his voice to children. Jerry Nelson died in 2012 at 78. Number 5, Dave Goelz as Gonzo/Dr. Bunsen, Honeydew/Zoot/Beauregard. Dave Goelz was born in 1946 in Los Angeles. He stepped into 1976 at 30, right when the Muppet Show turned Gonzo into one of the strangest and most memorable faces of the entire brand. What makes it interesting is that Goelz did not enter the Muppets as a performer. He came from industrial design, then joined Jim Henson in 1973 as a designer and puppet builder. In other words, he came in through the side door, then slowly became the person behind one of the most iconic characters. What makes Dave Goelz special is Gonzo. He admitted that in the first season he felt insecure, afraid to fully unleash the character's energy. It was not until season 2 when he gained confidence that Gonzo truly became wild, reckless, and joyful the way audiences remember. Later, Goelz described that journey as a beautiful arc from insecurity to chaotic madness to finally a character with depth and soul, especially clear in the Muppet Christmas Carol. That is why Gonzo is not just funny. He grows. Dave does not carry scandal or dramatic tragedy. His story is different and honestly admirable in a very grounded way. A man who started in a technical role, doubted himself, learned in the toughest environment of the Muppets, and stayed long enough to become one of the last original figures still standing today. In 2023, he was honored for 50 years as a Muppet performer. This year, he is 80, and in a list full of loss, he is a rare reminder that not everything from that golden era is gone. Number 6, Steve Whitmire as Rizzo the Rat /Lips/Foo-Foo. Steve Whitmire might be the least familiar name on this list. He did not enter the Muppet Show as a ready-made star, but as a kid from Atlanta who loved puppets. Born in 1959, when the show premiered in 1976, he was only 17. 2 years later, Whitmire joined the Muppets team, starting with roles like Rizzo the Rat Lips and Foo-Foo. Nobody thought that young man would one day carry Kermit for nearly 3 decades. What makes Whitmire interesting is that he was not handed the spotlight. He worked his way up quietly, learning inside one of the toughest creative environments in the Henson world. The biggest turning point came after Jim Henson's death in 1990. Whitmire was chosen by the Henson family to take over Kermit. Just hearing that tells you the pressure. He took the Kermit puppet, kept it in a drawer for a while because he did not feel ready, then recorded Bein' Green and sent it to the Henson family. That is not someone grabbing an opportunity. That is someone who understood exactly how sacred that role was. He stayed with Kermit until 2016, longer than many people realize. The most controversial part of Steve Whitmire's story came after that. In 2017, he said losing Kermit was a complete shock and claimed he was removed for being too direct and too protective of the character's consistency. The Muppet Studio responded that the issue was his working style over many years. Brian Henson even said Whitmire made unreasonable demands and often pushed things to the edge. That is the bitter edge of this list. A man chosen to carry Kermit after Jim Henson ended up leaving that same world in controversy. This year, Steve Whitmire is 67. He is still here, and for many longtime fans, he still represents a version of the Muppets that had not yet lost its original spirit. Number 7, Aaron Usker as Janice/Hilda/Wanda. Aaron Usker is one of the names people forget the fastest when they look back at the Muppet Show, even though she actually mattered a whole lot more than most people remember. Born in 1948 in Ankara, Turkey, and raised in Michigan, Aaron studied drama seriously at the University of Michigan, then performed with the National Shakespeare Company before stepping into the Henson world. When The Muppet Show premiered in 1976, she was 28. And in that first season, Aaron was pretty much the only regular female face in the performer lineup. She was tied to Janice in season 1, to Hilda, to Wanda, and honestly, without Aaron Usker, the female side of The Muppet Show in those early days would have felt even thinner. What makes Aaron's story sad is not scandal or drama. It is sad in a quieter way. After the first season, she left The Muppet Show, but she did not completely cut ties with Henson. Aaron still showed up in the Muppet Movie and Emmett Otter's Jug Band Christmas before gradually stepping back to focus on family and keep living with the craft in a different way. that is the easiest part of this story to miss. Erin did not disappear. She just was not standing in the middle of the spotlight anymore. In the years after that, she kept contributing to puppetry by founding the Puppeteers Caucus within the Screen Actors Guild in 1989, then receiving the Joseph C. Riley Award in 1991. Which means, even when she was no longer a name, people mentioned a lot, she was still quietly working to make sure people like her had a clearer place in the profession. Then the tragedy came too early. Erin Usker died of cancer in 1993 at just 44. And maybe that is what makes her story hit in such a particular way. Not because she was ever loud, but because she mattered, because she was there right at the beginning, and because she was gone too soon before a lot of people ever really understood how valuable she was. Number 8. Louise Gold as Annie Sue Pigg. Louise Gold does not have the kind of loud story or big tragedy that some of the earlier names do. She is one of the most formidable women ever to step into the Muppets world. Born in 1956 in London, Louise joined The Muppet Show in Season 2 in 1977 when she was only 21. Before that, she had already been formally trained at arts educational schools, going in through singing, acting, and musical theater rather than straight puppetry. Jim Henson personally trained her when she joined the show. The role most closely tied to Louise is Annie Sue Pigg. This was not some character tossed in just to fill out the lineup. Annie Sue was created specifically for Louise, and that character helped make the female side of The Muppet Show feel much fuller after the first season. Christopher Finch later called Louise the most versatile female puppeteer ever to work on the show, and also the only British member of the main performer cast. So to put it simply, she was not just there to balance the numbers. She raised the bar for the female side of that whole stage. What a lot of viewers probably never think about is how physically demanding this work really was. Interview material about Louise shows that being a Muppet performer was serious physical labor, and it could easily lead to back pain and shoulder pain from holding a puppet in difficult positions for long stretches. For a woman in her early 20s, this was not some cute little TV job. It was real stage labor. After the Muppets, Louise did not disappear at all. She became one of the key faces of Spitting Image from 1984 to 1986, then built a major West End career with Blood Brothers' Anything Goes, Mamma Mia, Mary Poppins, and plenty of other big productions. This year, Louise Gold is 70. Maybe she is not the person on this list who makes people ache the most, but she is absolutely one of the people you have to respect the most. Number 9. Fran Brill as Janice/Mary Louise. Fran Brill is not the name that takes up the most spotlight in The Muppet Show, but she is one of the most important pioneering women in the whole Muppets world. Born in 1946 in Pennsylvania, Fran stepped into 1976 at 30. She studied acting seriously at Boston University, then headed to New York with stage dreams like so many young actors of that era. The thing is, Fran's beginning was not pretty. The first show that took her to Broadway closed very quickly, and that disappointment shoved her straight into the kind of struggle that defined old New York, where a young actor could fall from hope to unemployment almost overnight. And it was from that stumble that Fran Brill turned toward the path that made her a trailblazer. In 1970, Jim Henson hired her for Sesame Street, and Fran became the first female performer he hired besides Jane Henson. That was a huge milestone because at that point, puppetry in the Henson group was still almost entirely a man's world. On The Muppet Show itself, Fran's mark is not as heavy as Jim Henson's, Frank Oz's, or Richard Hunt's, but she was still there in some very memorable pieces, including Janice and some of the early musical numbers, and Mary Louise and I'm in Love with a Big Blue Frog. She was not the person standing center stage the longest, but she was part of the foundation the show was built on. What is really impressive about Fran Brill is that she did not just hang on. She went far. Alongside puppetry, she kept her acting career going with Being There, Midnight Run, and What About Bob? Then, after more than 4 decades in the profession, she retired from puppeteering in 2014. Then, in 2025, Fran received a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Children's and Family Emmy Awards, A late but very deserved recognition for the woman who helped open that door for the people who came after her. This year, Fran Brill is 80, and it is really good to know she is still doing well. Number 10, Katherine Mullen as Gaffer the Cat. Katherine Mullen is the kind of person who at first glance seems like she just passed through the stage, but the closer you look, the more you realize how far she actually went from that very edge of the curtain. She was born in 1940 in New York and entered the Muppets world in 1978 first with The Muppet Movie, then moving into The Muppet Show in Season 3. On this show in particular, the role most closely tied to her is Gaffer the Cat, the backstage cat who only pops up for a second but ended up being incredibly important to Katherine herself. According to Muppet Records, Jim Henson gave Gaffer to her as a way to get her used to the monitor and the rhythm of performing. It sounds simple, but really that was how a newcomer got tested inside the toughest machine in the Henson system. What is great about Katherine Mullen is that she did not step into the Muppets with some giant role. She worked her way up through skill. From Gaffer on The Muppet Show, Katherine gradually became the program's third full-time female puppeteer, then went on to much bigger milestones than most people probably realize. She was Moki Fraggle and Cotter Pindoozer in Fraggle Rock. The performer behind Kira in The Dark Crystal helped Frank Oz with Yoda's right hand in The Empire Strikes Back, and later became one of the people who created Between the Lions. Katherine does not have some major scandal or loud public tragedy. What is so admirable about her is the steadiness. Alongside her husband designer Michael K. Frith, she also co-founded No Strings, an organization that makes educational puppet films for children in places affected by war landmines and crisis. That is seriously admirable. Number 11, Karen Prell as Rockin' Robin / various bit parts. Karen Prell did not walk into the Muppet Show as a big name. She came in through the love of a fan. At the end of 1979, after sending a bunch of letters and a self-made videotape to Henson Associates, Karen suddenly got a call from New York because Jim Henson had watched her tape and wanted her to audition right away. Karen was born in 1959, so when she stepped into the Henson machine in 1979, she was only 20. On The Muppet Show itself, Karen showed up in the final season with smaller jobs than a lot of the other people on this list. She worked as a background puppeteer, helped with performance support, and one of the easiest bits to mention is her Robin in the Rockin' Robin number. But Karen's value is not about how much screen time she got on the show. What matters is that this was the door that truly brought her into the Henson world. After starting with Sesame Street, Karen was also sent to London to keep learning and working inside the machinery of The Muppet Show during its final period. And from that small opening, Karen Prell went a long way. She became Red Fraggle in Fraggle Rock, the role her name is tied to more clearly than anything she did on The Muppet Show. Her personal life was tied to the set in a very literal way, too. Karen has told the story of how her romance with puppeteer Mike Quinn started through the monitor on set. Then, the two of them got married, lived in England for years, and later divorced. After that, Karen turned toward another very impressive chapter, doing animation work for Pixar, Valve, and a bunch of other computer-based projects. This year, she is about 67. Karen Prell was not the person who walked onto the stage with the biggest role. She was the person who walked in with passion, learned fast, and turned a small opportunity into a very long career. Number 12, Jane Henson as additional Muppet / backstage performer. Jane Henson is the name that ought to stand at the end of this list because she brings everything back to the true starting point. Before The Muppet Show had Kermit, Miss Piggy, or a whole cast, the audience could recognize and name Jane was already there from the beginning. She was born in 1934 in Queens, met Jim Henson in a puppetry class at the University of Maryland, and quickly became an important creative and business partner. The Jim Henson Company calls Jane an integral creative and business partner, and the Smithsonian points out that she helped Jim develop Sam and Friends and a lot of the early technical innovations that shaped the Muppets on television. If you look only at The Muppet Show, Jane's performance credits are pretty small. She was not the face standing center stage like the others before her, but that is exactly why Jane matters in a different way. She does not represent one character. She represents the foundation of that whole world. Jane and Jim married in 1959, had 5 children, then separated in 1986 without divorcing. According to biographer Brian J. Jones, Jane called it a handshake of a separation. The sad part of this story is not loud scandal. It is that a woman who was both a co-founder and a builder stepped back so the family and that whole legacy could keep going. After Jim died, Jane created the Jim Henson legacy to preserve his work. In her final years, she battled cancer, became paralyzed, and died in 2013 at 78. And maybe this is the best possible way to close the whole list. Without Jane Henson there, very likely would not have been a Muppets world for anybody on this list to step into. After looking back at the cast, it is hard not to feel a little choked up. So much talent gone too soon, so many lives turning in directions nobody could have seen coming. But that is also when you remember why the Muppet Show still lives on, because behind all the real-life loss, this show was still one of the wildest, smartest, funniest machines American television ever built. And if you are still here, this is the best reward of all the 5 most interesting facts about the Muppet Show. First, across all 120 episodes, only Kermit the Frog and Waldorf appeared all the way from beginning to end. It sounds simple, but when you really think about it, it is pretty wild because even a lot of characters who feel like they were always there did not pull that off. Second, in the early days, the show really struggled to book guest stars. Things only truly changed after ballet legend Rudolf Nureyev agreed to appear. From that point on, the show started to carry the kind of status that made famous people want to be part of it. Third, the Swedish chef was so funny that people on the crew would often gather around whenever he showed up. A lot of the laughter you hear in the final broadcast versions is actually real laughter from the crew itself. Fourth, the Swedish chef was also the only character with human hands. And honestly, that probably had to be the case because with all that chaotic cooking, he did fake hands, probably could not have handled it. And finally, this is the most impressive thing about Jim Henson. He chose to end the show while it was still at its peak. The final season even got the highest Nielsen ratings of the whole series. Very few shows know how to stop at exactly the right moment. And maybe that is the part that hits the hardest when you look back at the Muppet Show nearly half a century later. We are not just looking at an old show or a few faces that changed with time. We are looking back at a piece of childhood, a piece of an era when families still sat closer together, laughter was simpler, and little things on a screen could stay in somebody's heart for a lifetime. Time has taken a lot away. It took youth. It took familiar faces. It took the people who built that world. But the most beautiful thing is it could not take away the gratitude. If you love The Muppet Show enough to feel sad seeing this video end, leave a comment about the character or memory you remember most. And make sure to subscribe because the next video could very well be 20 insane facts about The Muppet Show.
But there is something interesting about the shows that live the longest in our memories. The more familiar they feel, the easier it is to think we already know everything about them. But behind it, there is an entire layer of backstage stories that many viewers have never heard. So today, we are heading back to Hazard County and uncovering the most fascinating secrets behind the Dukes of Hazzard. And trust me, a few of them may make you see this series in a completely different way.